Joining everybody. It looks like we still have people that are logging in. Just want to send out a couple of reminders that if you use Internet Explorer, that's not a supported browser and it could cause some technical issues. If you just look right now and see if you're on Internet Explorer, if you want to exit and come back in using Chrome or Safari or another browser to make sure you don't have any technical issues. Also, if you would like to send in questions or if you need assistance, you can use the chat. This is also through your mobile app as well as your computers. You can send in any questions or click the raise hand button for technical assistance, and we'll be glad to help you and make sure that you can view the presentation and hear the audio. So we're going to give it just another minute, make sure everyone's in before we start the presentation. All right, without further ado, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your attention as we go through the alternate entry analysis and welcome your feedback. We also have an interactive survey that we'll be doing at the end of the presentation, as well as a question and answer session. I know a lot of you have sent in questions already. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Mark Dubner, who is the Director of Aviation for Dallas Love Field Airport. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Danetta, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We would like to go through where we are in the project we've been working on for a little while, looking at an alternative entry. We've briefed the City Council a couple of times already regarding this project and have been moving forward with the analysis portion. And we're kind of at the public input part of the project, whereby we want to get out the information of what we've done thus far and what the next steps are going to be, and start getting that public input, which will help guide the future analysis and ultimately a recommendation to council on what direction we would like to go as an airport. Just to remember that the alternate entry is been identified as a need for the airport on a sort of a long-term basis. It's not a near-term issue now because of the reduction in traffic we've seen, but prior to the pandemic and the loss of traffic we had at Love Field, we were really at failure at the main entrance. Love Field, as you know, has kind of that single point of entry. It has been identified in our master plan as a potential problem. And so we began this endeavor about 18 months ago, looking at different ways that we might be able to alleviate that traffic, create another way into the airport, as well as mitigate those risks that we have with the single entry. The way we've gone about this process is really using the technical aspects primarily. So we're in the engineering or have completed the engineering phase, which really was meant to look at all the potential opportunities there would be to create an alternate entry, given Love Field's position in the city and in the neighborhood and connecting with the surrounding roadway network. But it also was looking at which one of those alternatives would solve the problems that we had with regard to congestion, traffic emissions, and as well as the risks that we incur having the single entry. At one of the Transportation Committee briefings, we did get feedback from the council that another key element in the analysis that we needed to include would be a connection to the light rail line. I think mobility has grown a lot more important in the city over the past years. And so the council was pretty clear that any alternative entry analysis needed to include some way that we could make a connection to the light rail line, to DART. We're currently served by bus service from the Inwood station on the Green Line, but having a people mover or light rail or streetcar solution to connect was something that the council thought was very important, so that we could create a mobility option besides the current ones available to our customers and our employees. So that was added to kind of the analysis. We'll kind of go through where we were and what we've done thus far, and I'll run through that here in a minute to explain kind of what the logic was and how the engineering led us to the current alternatives that we're moving forward with our assessment, and also then to get the input from you. We've gotten a lot of questions already, and I can see from the chat that a number of questions are popping up, and those are the kind of things that we need to include in the analysis with regard to the impacts of the project. So moving right along, we were here in the meeting purpose. The need, as I mentioned, really is stemmed from the difficulty we have in moving the amount of vehicles through the intersection we have serving the airport. Mockingbird Lane, Herb Kelleher Way intersection is the only entrance. It's burdened not only by the volumes that were coming into the airport, but also by the volumes on Mockingbird Lane. We serve about 80,000 vehicles a day, and the intersection is into a level F failure. And at peak, it is actually into a deeper level of F, where there are multiple cycles of the light before people can move through the intersection. That's a significant problem with regard to congestion mitigation, which has a direct result on the emissions as cars stuck in traffic or have a greater impact with emissions to the air quality around the city. Now, bear in mind that Dallas is in a non-attainment area, and so there's a lot of efforts being undertaken not only at the airport but throughout the city to mitigate those congestions to improve air quality. We also have had a few incidents, and as well as lane closures. Last year we had a lane closure for some construction, and we really had quite a mess in that people weren't able to get through the intersection and on the Herb Kelleher Way, and were waiting for an extended period, which caused people to be running late for their flights and really impacted our ability to service our customers at the airport. The other thing, we have had a couple incidents now, knock on wood, nothing significant that would be closed down the roadway. But if we did have a security incident at the airport and the roadway was blocked, we would have some difficulty in getting first responders into the airport if we had a blockage on Herb Kelleher. And that, really speaks to that mitigation of risk that we have at the airport. So that's a significant concern that we had, and we're looking at mitigating. So really, we started out with looking at the entry analysis to address our safety, the mobility, congestion, security, and those operational risks. We started that process, as I said, back in really 2017, when we looked at the master plan and kind of revisited because of the explosive growth we had since 2014. As everyone, I I assume, but if you don't, we went from about an 8 million passenger airport to about 16 million. Now, all of that's been kind of put on hold during the pandemic, but we can assume that at some point the traffic will return to the airport. It's not going to be this year, probably won't be next year, but over the coming years, we will get back to a point where we have a high volume of folks going through Love Field. We have a significant demand in the Dallas market, and so we really began this process in earnest, knowing that this was going to be a multi-year project that would require not only the analysis of alternatives, but also the deeper dive into the traffic modeling and the environmental impacts for any additional roadway or entry into the airport. So that's where we are now. We're working with a number of partners, mainly North Central Texas Council of Government, who handles all the traffic modeling for the region. So we're going to continue working with them as well as our transportation department. And I can say that on direction of council, we are contributing to a larger effort to a area plan, for lack of a better term, which is going to be inclusive of the park department, sustainable development and construction, our planning and urban design department, really looking at the impacts not only to the airport, but to the Bachman Lake, to the park, to Northwest Highway, the neighborhoods to the north, especially as that is an area that seems to be in transition, and there's a lot of attention on the type of development that may happen up there. Not necessarily related to the airport, but certainly we play a role in that. And so we have gotten together with a number of other departments, and we'll be working together to coordinate all of the improvements and things that are going to be happening. So moving along in our analysis, we initially, when the first concept came up about an alternate entry, City Council asked us to look at every possible way that we might create an alternate entry into the airport to mitigate the issues that we had with the single entry. We determined there were roughly 11 conceptual alternates that we would review, that we could look at whether they would solve basically the problems that we had identified. The criteria we used in that first round really was an engineering criteria, strictly numbers, not really talking about impacts necessarily, but it was the overall improvement of reduction in vehicle miles traveled, as well as that congestion in the emissions reduction, and improving the traffic flow. We did add, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to accommodate the people mover system to connect to DART, and make sure that the route would provide that pathway for emergency needs if we needed. We used basically a 6 category, whether each of these alternatives on those 4 items provided an excellent solution, a good, neutral, whether it was challenging to provide a solution to our issues with that option, and then in the bottom 2 in our negative and critical impact. Negative and critical impact meaning that alternative would not be able to solve one of the issues that we had identified in that first criteria. So moving along, we just went one by one, looking at all of the various options that we had. The first 3 alternatives, 1 through 3, were really to improve the intersection that we had at Mockingbird and Herb Kelleher. Talking about different traffic methods using a urban diamond exchange, any way that we could really solve the issue with the existing footprint we had for the intersection. We have some limitations with regard to right-of-way widths. We also have the challenge at that intersection, as I mentioned earlier, with the high volumes on Mockingbird and the need for signal timing to allow throughput. We also have some infrastructure challenges with regard to some very large utilities that run underneath Mockingbird Lane, as well as we have height restrictions. As you can see from this slide, the two red trapezoid figures represent the runway protection zones, where we're really not allowed to build, or we should discourage any development or build out. A lot of that's on private property, so we can't directly control it since we don't own it. We also have what are called Part 77 surfaces, which are those imaginary planes that extend from the end of the runway and the sides of the runway and go up. And so they're on an angle. The FAA requires those to be object free, so nothing can be built in those imaginary planes as they ascend from the airport. And that really was the height restrictions for any kind of grade separation with regard to a flyover. So we're limited underneath Mockingbird and limited above Mockingbird. And as you can see, really those first three on our improvement of our vehicle miles traveled, we didn't get any improvement. There really was no solution for our people mover integration, because we would essentially have to take the people mover at grade, which would further compound the congestion on Mockingbird. Next, we looked at alternative 4, which was essentially a U-turn, or I think it's colloquially called a Michigan turn, where we would have eastbound traffic essentially passing the intersection with a turnaround and back. That was challenging, really from a right-of-way standpoint, and ultimately we just didn't get any kind of reduction in the vehicle miles traveled. The volumes were still all the way around the airport what they were prior. Additionally, still have the same challenge with the people mover as integrating that with that solution. Alternative 5 was to have a alternate entry a little further east or northeast of the current intersection on Waddell Avenue, and we would kind of have a circuit, kind of a route that would run through by the off-airport parking lots, running there and then connecting back with Tom Braniff. It really didn't do anything to improve the congestion at Mockingbird and Herb Keller. As a matter of fact, it made it worse. Having a protected turn lane there with a signal actually made things worse at the intersection where we were, and really caused a problem with the throughput on Mockingbird as well. So essentially 1 through 5, looking at that, as I mentioned before, the people mover integration really was challenged, mainly because of there's no way to grade separate. As you know, they had DART, the green line actually goes beneath Mockingbird over on Denton Drive. And the reason that went below grade is because of the height restrictions. But because of the utilities we had, that option was not available. So it really, none of those first 5 alternatives we looked at solved any of our problems. Alternative 11 was looking at a connection to Denton Drive going off there to the west side of the airport. It did have some real merit with regard to connecting to the Burbank station, as well as all the way up to the Bachman station on the DART rail line. It did improve. We had a 4.4% reduction in vehicle miles traveled, assuming some folks that were coming from the north would opt to go around the north end of the airport down south on Denton to connect. Also, the traffic coming from the west could be diverted onto Denton Drive. The real challenge on that, on the people mover, although the connection and the distances were good, the grade change to get below the runway and back up to grade at Denton Drive was a real challenge. In some ways, Love Field is got some benefit in being having a small footprint, in that, there's lots of land that's usable around the airport. We only occupy about 1,300 total acres. However, that proximity causes challenges when we talk about the distances you need to allow cars and a people mover to go below grade and then come back up to grade to connect back with the roadway system. It did have good benefits with the alternate or for the emergency needs. It would be a good way for during a critical incident, getting other first responders into the airport if that Mockingbird Herb Kelleher intersection was blocked. But that's kind of where we were with that, with the alternates. So we went to the Transportation Committee, kind of shared where we were looking at those with critical impact that really we didn't get the solutions. We didn't get the improvement. And so just from a basic cost benefit analysis, which is really how we've approached this project, if we don't get a net benefit to the traffic around the airport, then there's no need to move forward with the project. The first 5 alternatives really didn't give us that net benefit. The traffic wasn't improved enough, and the vehicle miles traveled weren't impacted significantly. So at the time, we and then the alternative 11 at committee, basically, we're letting them know that the alternative 11 really wasn't viable with the people mover. It just wasn't there wasn't an engineering solution to the grade problem we would have trying to make that integration of the people mover. So that was kind of a critical item that struck it from consideration. So now we're moving on. These were the remaining alternatives that we were going to present to the Transportation Committee last month. We didn't get an opportunity to do that. The committee meeting ran long, and so it got pushed off. We do intend to return to the Transportation Committee. Talking to the chair of the committee, we were encouraged to continue to move forward with the community input. I think also the intent would be, at the time we do the briefing, there'll be an opportunity for other partners. I think the chair was going to provide an opportunity for other partners and other interested parties to have an opportunity to speak at the committee. I haven't got any update on that, but that's as I understood it a few weeks ago, so we can continue to work on that. So moving on, we really have narrowed it. Now we want to spend the remainder of our energy evaluating these remaining 4 alternatives. Alternative 6 on your screen would be the Shorecrest Drive, which is essentially a pathway from the terminal through the center of the airport, connecting with Shorecrest Drive. We did see in the traffic modeling that we did get a real improvement, over 5% reduction in the total vehicle miles traveled from the airport traffic compared to our baseline where we were prior to the pandemic, essentially. We do know that about 45% of all of the airport traffic comes from the north. So our customer base is pretty evenly distributed from the north and south, which is really what drives that vehicle mile travel reduction. In that 45% of our customers essentially are having to circumnavigate the entire airport to get to the entrance. So this would be a pathway for them to reduce that total travel time and total miles traveled. The alternative 6 was strong in connections to the emergency needs, creating that alternate pathway in case we had a problem on Herb Keller, and vice versa. Either entry would be able to access the airport. The only issue would be the people mover integration, the connectivity to the Burbank or Bachman station. It's about a 2.5 mile ride to Bachman, about 2.3 miles to Burbank. Bachman may be more viable. I think one of the issues on Shorecrest, though, that we need to look more deeply into is the current traffic loads on Shorecrest. I know there's some other projects happening at Southwest headquarters and the construction of a new parking garage for the employees they have, which is contributing to the traffic on Shorecrest. We are looking, and we did actually met with the transportation department, talking about the opportunities with the amount of right-of-way we have, whether or not Shorecrest could be widened to handle the larger volumes. But one way or another, Shorecrest would have to be improved to handle additional volume. I think I see in the chat a number of folks are pointing out that Shorecrest does have heavy congestion. Likewise, the Webb Chapel Extension Bridge has a lot of congestion as folks try to get over and get onto Northwest Highway. So those are things we're going to have to look at a little more deeply. Alternative 7 would be the same pathway through the center of the airport, and then it would cross over Bachman Lake in a direct connection with Northwest Highway. It provided a significant vehicle mile traveled reduction, almost 6% reduction. It reduces it provides a pathway both to the Bachman station and the Burbank station. It would have impacts with regard to a bridge over the lake, and I think that's a source of concern for a number of folks. So we also want to look at what those impacts would be and sort of mitigation things that we could do if that was one of the options we further considered. Moving on, alternative 8 would be a Shorecrest connection, not at the center. It would require a little more significant tunneling to bring us along the western edge of the airport and connecting to Shorecrest closer to Denton Drive. It had about the same volume of reduction as connecting through the center of the airport. It does provide viability on that connectivity to the DART rail. The grades are sufficient if we take an angled approach to get under the Denton runway, and likewise provided that same emergency access that we were looking for. And then the alternative 9, which would require a little more engineering, probably a little more significant tunneling, but that would be to take it across the airfield, partly at grade and then dropping below grade to get under the taxiways and runways on the northeast corner and connecting with Lemon Avenue. It did result in a little better than the Shorecrest options, giving us almost a 5.5% reduction in the vehicle miles traveled. Connectivity to Lemon being a major thoroughfare that's not really taxed. So it was one of the alternatives that we wanted to keep. Probably the biggest strike against this alternative, and we would need to kind of look at it a little more in depth, would be the proximity to connection to DART. As we move further east, we're moving away from the light rail line, which making that connection a little more difficult and a little more costly. And then alternative 10 was a kind of a direct east route that would require significant tunneling. It would really be underground the entirety. Like the previous connection to Lemon, about a 5.5% reduction in the vehicle miles traveled. It also, I think the big knock on it would be the difficulty of making that people mover connection or connecting to the DART rail and from the mobility standpoint. So we're gonna continue to evaluate that. And one of the things I want to talk about, one of the issues brought up in the chat is why haven't we assigned any sort of cost estimates to these? Well, frankly, at this point, we need to know that a solution would be viable. I think this next round, and we'll talk about kind of at the end, as we add criteria, and the goal of today is really to hear your feedback and add additional criteria in the analysis that we're going to do. Cost will come into that. So some of the solutions, certainly those with a larger amount of tunneling, will require a greater cost than roadways built at grade. So we will be adding that in. We haven't done that yet. It's kind of premature in sort of a planning exercise to identify cost at this point, but we will be bringing that in as we kind of move further along in that analysis. So that's kind of where we are today. I think Danetta wanted to kind of run through the public input survey and what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be putting that out to all of our customers. So we're kind of tracking our questions as they come in. I know we've got good turnout today, and a lot of questions we probably we won't be able to get to, but we will publish every question and the responses. So we want to make sure that everyone knows questions that have been asked, and we'll be sure to have more detailed answers. And then I'm going to tackle several of those as best I can in this format. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. So Danetta, if you want to kind of walk through what we're doing with regard to the public with the survey, and then maybe kind of talk about our social media, and then she'll turn it back to me when we get to the kind of Q&A.
All right, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. So I want to let everybody know that we're going to go ahead and answer a lot of questions tonight right here on this forum, but also that our survey is going to be open and available until September 30th. So there's plenty of time to give additional input. Our survey is available in English and in Spanish. But just real quick, the purpose of our survey is we want to get your input. We want to know what your thoughts are on an alternate entry, and to gain understanding of how you travel to the airport and what are some of those methods, as well as understand what your priorities are in helping us to determine a great alternate entry and other factors that we should be considering. In our survey, we want to make sure that we're getting feedback from community members, people in the area, as well as the region, airport customers and airline passengers, as well as tenants, contractors, and employees who are at the airport every day. So we really want to figure out how you're getting there and to get your feedback. So we're going to take a couple of minutes to actually go through the questions. So I'm going to post them. I'm sorry, wrong button. So I'm going to go ahead and post the survey now. So you can go ahead and click the questions to type in your answers. And I'm just going to read through the questions that you're going to be answering. Yep. And I see people are already putting in feedback. So first we want to find out where are you coming in from? You know, do you live near the airport? Are you a frequent customer and maybe you're well outside the Dallas area, somewhere else in the region? A lot of our customers live north of Dallas. And then, of course, in looking at some of the alternatives, you know, traffic may be different, or your patterns of going to the airport may be different because of the current COVID pandemic. But we want to understand how you would normally use the airport. So what has happened prior to COVID, as well as, you know, when we do a lot of traffic analysis, we look at what's going to happen down the road, not necessarily just today or because of COVID or what happened yesterday. So we want to know how often you're coming to the airport. Then in question 3, When you are traveling to the airport, how do you normally get there? Are you using a rideshare service like Uber or Lyft, a taxi? Are you using some type of shared van pool? Do you normally take a rental car? Does somebody drop you off or you use public transit? Do you normally drive yourself and then do you park in one of the surrounding areas? Or do you walk or bicycle to the airport? And in number 4, if you drive yourself, where do you park? Do you go to valet parking? Do you self-park right there on airport property? Or do you use one of the off-airport parking lots? And then from our list provided, we gave 6 different alternatives. So tonight, we just want to know what your number 1 priority is. But if you do the online survey, because I know some of these options, you might think that all of them are priority or several of them are priority. You also have that additional option to rank them. So you might say, hey, my number 1 is this, but all these other things are important. And you can give the ranking for all of them. But tonight in this form, we'll ask you just for what's your number 1 top priority. Then moving on to number 6, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, did you take any type of alternate route to avoid our main entrance, our intersection at Mockingbird and Herb Keller Way? And then moving on to number 7, would you benefit through reduced travel time by having an alternate airport entry? And then number 8, what other factors should we consider? So we want to get input from everyone to determine what else we should be thinking about and what should we consider in looking at some of the alternate entries. And then lastly, what other improvements would you like to see added around the airport? So we'll give you just a few minutes. We're going to be showing the results of what you entered today, as well as, like I said, the online survey is going to be open until September 30th. So there's a lot more time for input, but we definitely wanted to gather your input tonight. So right now I'm seeing we have about 17 people of the population on the meeting tonight that's given feedback so far. So I got about 30 people entering. So I'm going to go ahead and give you just another moment to enter. And you can continue to send in your questions. We do have quite a few questions. I don't know that we will get through all of them tonight. We probably had about 25 questions that were submitted ahead of the meeting, which we tried to give some responses to. And you'll see that when we get to the question and answer mode. But if you want to continue to send in your questions, as well as continue to type in your input, and if you want to just, answer some quick choices, remember, you can always go to the online survey to give way more detail, or if you have lots of options for alternate entries or more considerations or input that you want to give, since we'll just have this part open for just a few minutes so we can continue the presentation and have ample time to answer questions. You always have those opportunities, and share the link as well with your neighbors. So tonight, if you click in the upper right-hand corner where it says event board, the presentation is available and the links to the survey are also available, so that you can go ahead and click on the link online to do a more in-depth survey or give more in-depth input at your convenience. Like I said, that survey will be open until September 30th. So right now, let's see how many questions or answers we have. I have about 56 people who have done the survey so far. So we're going to give you about 1 more minute, and then we're just going to close it out just to kind of get some initial reactions and initial input. This information will be included in our survey results, but you have ample time to do it later. This is just wanted to kind of get an idea of what input we have so far tonight. Okay, so if you guys want to start closing out your input, we're going to give about 10 more seconds, and then we're just going to end the voting so that we can just kind of see what our initial responses are. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Okay, going to close in about 5 more seconds. All right, so we're going to end the voting there, and I'm just going to show real quickly our results. Okay, let's move back up. All right, so we can kind of see for question 2, a lot of the people online today giving our feedback are regular people who are coming monthly or quarterly to the airport. A lot of us are using rideshare, or we're parking ourselves, or someone's dropping us off. So a lot of automobiles commuting to the airport. When we do go there, a lot of us are using the self-park garages on airport property. From our feedback tonight, some of the top priorities are increase in neighborhood traffic, as well as seconding that to decreasing our traffic congestion, as well as impacts to Bachman Lake Park or Trail. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, most people were not avoiding the intersection or not traveling through that intersection unless they were going to the airport. And then would you benefit from a reduced travel time for alternate entry? Of our feedback right now, a lot of you are saying no, about 46%. And then, we'll definitely be sharing other input that you gave tonight. So we really appreciate your time in sharing that quick feedback. And we'll continue to add that information to the survey. So we're going to go quickly back to the presentation. So I want to point out again, the links to the survey are on your screen. You can share those links with your family and friends, your neighbors. And then we're going to move on to next steps. Mark, do you want to go ahead and just talk about the next steps in our public engagement and in our alternative analysis? Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. So we'll continue with our public outreach, kind of describing the project and soliciting feedback. We'll be doing it across our social media platforms as well, trying to hit all of our constituents. And I'll try and address, I've been reading the questions, trying to figure the best way to tackle them. So one thing I wanted to kind of express, I saw a couple of questions kind of similar about, Mark, this seems to be.
We'll post the questions. We'll post the questions when on that part.
I got it. But so the issue really, and Love Field, and as a lot of you may know, we have a Good Neighbor Plan initiative where we've really tried to recognize that we're an airport. And, I think for a lot of years, the airport really didn't think much about anything other than they were an airport and that they needed to do all the things that they needed to do to run a good airport. There wasn't much regard to the impact to the surrounding community. And, and I've said, and I think a lot of you have heard me say, if you were going to pick a place to put an airport, our location, Love Field, is probably the worst location to put an airport. We're surrounded on all four sides by residential. We've got, a lot of multifamily to the north where our greatest noise impacts are. We have a lot of single family residential on the west and east. And then we're seeing increasing amounts of additional mixed use and multifamily to our south. So, we've tried to identify those areas where we can connect with the neighborhoods, where we can really try and be a better neighbor. That's challenging given that we're an airport. We have, a lot of noise, we cause traffic and all those kind of things. Part of our goal in all of this has been to not just focus on the traveler as our only customer or our only constituency. So some of you may participate in our Love Field Environmental Advisory Committee, which keeps a very close eye on our runway usage and our noise impacts, as well as, keeping up to date with all of the construction activity and how that affects our usage, how we try and get good behavior through our voluntary programs with not only the commercial airlines, but also the general aviation. And so to kind of tackle that question, we we really serve a number of customers. And I think the goal that we're trying to achieve here is not just focus on the airlines and the passengers. If that were the only thing, we wouldn't really engage with anyone outside the airport. We would, just look at it from a purely technical evaluation of we need to help more people get in and out of the airport quickly. It would be a strictly traffic engineering decision and analysis. But I don't think the city nor the airport, we need to do things like that anymore. One of the projects we had a community meeting a few weeks ago with our Lemon Avenue Streetscape. We own the land, really the entirety of Lemon Avenue from Shorecrest to Aerodrome, even on the east side of Lemon. And so one of the things we're doing is trying to promote and increase mobility around the airport in the efforts of, having Love Field be an asset to the community, not just an asset to the airlines and the travelers. So kind of the big picture is engaging with our immediate neighbors, and we realize that we have impacts, and that's really what this process is about. The slide we had on just a minute ago, we're going to be doing another meeting in July 23rd, and then we're planning to do another round of community input meetings in September. So we will continue this process moving along. The presentation will be available online, and so we will be continuing to get public input. So my moderator is saying we need to move along. The first question up, I hope everyone can see this, address the impacts traffic congestion on Northwest Highway. So really, the thing about traffic is kind of interesting, that it's not necessarily an improvement of traffic in one area will necessarily make traffic worse elsewhere. And that the flip side of that is too, that increased roadways often create what's called induced demand. So, traffic engineering and traffic planning has really evolved over the past few years. The idea, well, if we build more roads, we'll improve traffic, we'll improve congestion. However, a lot of times it doesn't. It's induced demand. It creates more traffic. In our analysis, we looked at you can see here the regional macro traffic modeling. So that's the movement of all the cars moving around the airport, not just the ones coming to the airport, but people traveling on all the other roadway systems, in addition to what is happening for the airport, because we are, really right in the middle. Unlike DFW, someone made a comment of DFW, a lot of airports have the benefit of a direct connection to a major highway or a freeway. We don't have that option. We don't have a connection. Our connection right now is on a city street. And that is what really is part of our challenge. What we look at and when we're doing our modeling, it really is looking at all of those traffic impacts. So the amount of volume that's already on Northwest Highway, some of that is traffic that is making its way to the airport. Additionally, on Lemon. So of all the customer base that we have to the north, a lot of that is using the existing roadways. Now, as congestion has increased, the one thing we have seen, and I think a lot of you folks on the virtual room with us who live near the airport, you have seen an increase in neighborhood traffic. As the congestion, gets worse on Mockingbird and Lemon and Denton, and people are seeking alternatives around that congestion. And we have seen, and what we're really trying to figure out with the models is if we make better traffic options available, then travelers won't seek those alternatives, primarily moving through the neighborhoods. So people are opting not to go on Mockingbird. They're going to go up to Northwest Highway, or maybe they'll, come down Lemon, or they're looking for other alternatives to avoid the congestion that we're seeing. So I think the models that we're using in North Central Texas Council of Governments got a lot of really smart people who work those, do the simulations to see if we created an alternative entry, and that's where those numbers came from, was that early analysis. The total amount of traffic that's driven by all the cars around in that survey area, if they could be diverted to an alternate entry, it reduces the total amount of miles driven by all the cars. And we're hoping, and as we do more analysis and it kind of work the model more, is we will see that movement from the increase in traffic through the neighborhoods back onto the thoroughfares where they were intended, that the arterials and the side streets and the residential streets will not be used if the major roadways and thoroughfares perform satisfactorily. Then people aren't going to be driven to cut through the neighborhoods or go south of the airport and cut over on Inwood to try and come up on Cedar Springs and things like that, or driving all the way around to come back at the airport from the east. So that's kind of trying to hit several of the kind of questions talking about what's the impact. The other issue is the roadway. One of the questions I saw on the had popped up about the air quality, especially if we had it on Shorecrest, or one of the options is a bridge over Bachman, and what the air quality would be. The fact of the matter is the air quality around Love Field is determined not by a single roadway. It's really determined by the amount of cars that are idling and the volume of cars all the way around the airport. There's not going to be a net reduction in the total amount of cars. What we're trying to do is get a net reduction in the total amount of miles each car drives, and less miles driven mean less emissions. If you've been in the afternoon, you can see Shorecrest and the Webb Chapel Extension Bridge, which goes over Bachman Lake, has heavy traffic. It's backed up, and you have several cycles to try and get through the Webb Chapel Northwest Highway extension. One of the things we talked about with the transportation department was whether or not we could use this project as an alternative to find a better solution to the Webb Chapel Extension Bridge and the congestion it causes, because you have that short light between the Lemon Avenue underpass on Northwest Highway, and then you have that immediate light right there at Webb Chapel Extension. So looking at the overall roadway system to help cars move through it more smoothly reduces those idle times and helps reduce the emissions. So that was kind of a long, rambling answer more than to just this question.
The second question on the screen.
All right, surrounding traffic. So as I kind of mentioned, we do in all the modeling, we want to look at what the impact would be to all the other intersections. When we first started this, we didn't, we were pretty clear that if we got improvement at the Mockingbird, Herb Kelleher intersection, that we wanted to make sure that we weren't just displacing that problem somewhere else. So say we had a northern entry or even a Lemon Avenue. We wouldn't want to reduce congestion at one intersection and then make that congestion reappear at another intersection. So we had always said that if that was the net, there was no net benefit, which is essentially what this question is asking, then we would recommend no action. Now, we can say that the early analysis and all the traffic modeling does show that the remaining alternatives that we have do improve overall the traffic, and then they do not increase or cause a degradation of the volume or the service levels on the other roadways and the other intersections. Next, you got next question?
Vaughn?
Okay, you can see the question here. Has the airport performed detailed long-term studies, environmental impact, traffic noise, health safety, surrounding communities? Or does the study only narrowly include traffic environmental impact to airports exclusion? So the answer to that's no, we have not done detailed studies. In order to do a detailed study, we actually have to have an alternative that we want to analyze. There isn't a way to do a environmental impact study if we don't know what the change to the baseline is. As you can see, our current high-level analysis showed a reduction in the vehicle miles traveled, emission, and congestions, and those reductions are not confined just to the airport. We would do, as we narrow these alternatives, a greater study on those traffic, emission, noise impacts, and health and safety impact for Bachman Park. Part of the requirement we have is a federally funded facility. So we take a lot of federal money. So we're subject to a lot of rules that the city isn't. So we actually have to comply with the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, and we'll have to do a NEPA review. Part of that process is we have to obtain a basically a no impact, or a finding of no significant impact, or a FONSI. And the way that that can be done, and the way we've done it in the past and other airports have done it, is your alternative, if it has impacts, those impacts can be mitigated. So there's a number of things that you could do if a project is going to have a negative impact, that you can mitigate that impact. One of the things I think that we were interested in doing, especially with regard to any of the alternatives that wind up affecting Bachman Park, would be to look at that, whatever those impacts to the park may be, and then that would free up our ability to fund mitigation in the park. So other airports have done it. If there's a impact to the park from a roadway or from a bridge, then our money, which otherwise we couldn't use because it's not airport property, our dollars could be used with the blessing of the FAA to provide amenities or improve the park to mitigate the impact. So, one of our strategies as we narrow these alternatives down is to look at what the potential impacts would be, and also what would be some potential mitigation that we might be able to fund that would get us to the point of receiving a FONSI, or finding a no significant impact. Next question. Is this with economic impacts, lower flight traffic, how is this viable, use taxpayer dollars? So kind of have an answer here. I won't repeat that. I mean, this is a long-term project. This is a long-term infrastructure change. Whether it's 5 or 10 years, this we do our planning on a 20 and 30 year time horizon. So ultimately, there are significant issues about having the single point of entry and the congestion at the intersection. So it will be a project that I think needs to help guide the airport over those next 50 years. The other thing, and I think we talk about it, there's no taxpayer dollars. Right now we are expending, we only ever expend airport funds. We don't. We're 100% fully funded by our own enterprise. We don't receive any property tax dollars. We don't receive any funding from the city through sales or property tax. We make all our revenues off of our various streams: parking, concessions, um, leasing of land, things like that. So we don't this isn't a taxpayer funded initiative. Our participation, I will say that there are a number of taxpayer funded initiatives with regard to Bachman Park, Northwest Highway. There's some mobility issues, one of which I know of is trying to fund a pedestrian bridge across Northwest Highway to connect the neighborhoods to the park, which is, something that we could perhaps roll into our project. So it's a mix. There's a lot of planning, a lot of development that's happening in the area. I think the city wants to get out in front of controlling it. We have, there's a pretty significant amount of affordable housing in that area north of the airport that, could be threatened by as much of the affordable housing in Dallas has been by redevelopment. So there's a lot of folks looking at a lot of elements on the north side of the airport. So we're just going to be part of it. But all of the energy and effort you see on the part of the airport is coming from airport funds. How much there is no, you can see here, the answer is no, there's no expected additional flight activity. We're federally limited to 20 gates. And the number of flights that can be served by one gate is just a function of how the airlines operate. We currently operate to about 205 commercial flights daily, scheduled flights daily, or we did prior to the pandemic. And there's really not much opportunity to increase that because we cannot add gates. So part of the Wright Amendment Reform Act was to limit Love Field to 20 gates. So we're not growing beyond the traffic levels we had prior to the pandemic as far as gates or flights. Now, whether or not the airlines, we have seen an increase in passenger, mainly because of the use of the larger aircraft. Southwest has been using or was using the 737-800s, which had about 35 more seats. But it was still the same number of flights. So there's no expected increase in air traffic. Are there future plans? We've reached out to Department of Parks and Rec and Transportation. They're going to be getting more information to us, and we'll put it as part of this this whole initiative on our website. So we'll continue to work with them. I know that there's a number of things that were funded in the bond program and in the Bachman Park on the north side over. We've got the new water or spray ground coming in, and I believe there's a skate park that's going to be built. So I think Bachman Park has got some energy and some new things coming to it. And we'll be happy to pass along that information, but largely that's under the purview of the Park and Rec Department. Why discount additional south improvements? No, the south. Okay, that's the answer. The south entry really doesn't work. I know I saw in one of the chats there isn't a way to do, as I mentioned, there's not a way to go to below grade because of the utilities, and there's not a way to do a grade separation in the air. So we couldn't do a flyover, which quite frankly would be the easiest. We are height restricted because of the runways. There's just not a way to do it. Someone else made a comment that there's a lot of room on Mockingbird to widen it. And that may be true. It would come at the cost of a lot of private development. There's been a lot. There's impact from, hotel, restaurants. We got car dealerships. So it would be pretty significant impact to all the private landowners if we tried to widen. And even widening may or may not get us anywhere near what we would need. I do agree that there at the end of the day, if the number one problem is emergency access, which that's one of the key elements, providing a way for folks to get in the airport, there are opportunities to bring emergency vehicles in, but they're not easy or quick. If it's not a roadway, a public roadway, it's really difficult because of the security that we have at the airport. So having police and fire, first responders coming to the airport not on a public roadway, that becomes fairly challenging. And really the intersection, if it's blocked or we have backups on Herb Kelleher, starting at the terminal, it really, we need another alternative. The only other way would be basically to route them through the airfield, which, is something that could be done if we had an extended issue, but it would require a lot of manpower. We'd have to cease all air traffic operations because we can't have unauthorized vehicles on the airfield and things like that. So this is an interesting question. We did look at a people mover connection to the Burbank station way back in 2008. And I think Park Board member Dickey had pointed out about that way back in 2008 that there was a people mover study that was done connecting to the Burbank station. We did a lot of analysis on that. It wound up being a fairly expensive proposition. It wasn't very easy to do. It was expensive as well to build as well as to maintain. So an extended tunnel, trying to figure out how to connect to the Burbank station also was a challenge because of kind of where they were in regard to Denton Drive and the current Green Line and how we would, have a below grade tunnel or station, things like that. At the time that was analyzed, there was talk of buying the land to move or to create a consolidated rental car facility off of Denton Drive at the Burbank, kind of that Burbank Denton Drive area. The city didn't do anything about it. It was prior to me getting to the airport. There was talk of doing the consolidated rental car facility there. It would have required land acquisition. And because we never did it, that land was eventually purchased by Southwest Airlines. And so all that land connected to right next to the Burbank station is owned by Southwest, where they have their training and operations center. They've made a major investment in the city with their training and operations center as well as their flight training building. So they've really done a lot of development on Denton Drive. So the Burbank station really is challenging to get to with a people mover. It probably require using some part of Denton Drive, which could cause other traffic issues. So that's kind of why we didn't move forward with the people mover connection to the Burbank station. And there was some, as the answer from the technical staff points out, there were some operational challenges on trying to get the train either from grade below the runways and back up, or having it a subterranean station both at Love Field and at Burbank, and then that added exponentially to the cost of construction and maintenance. But before I do this question, I did want to make one point. I don't know that necessarily the alternate entry with the road wouldn't preclude analyzing a people mover solution in another way. I think part of our analysis would look at, as we look at all the alternatives, if we didn't use the right of way we're using for a road or whatever infrastructure we were going to build for a road, make it big enough to handle vehicle traffic as well as a people mover. The analysis should include if we just put cars on one path, but then did a people mover on another path, what would that mean with regard to additional impact, additional cost, and those kind of things. So I'm not saying that the road and the people mover necessarily have to go together, but it does make a lot of sense from a cost standpoint. So we'll be including that in the analysis that we'll bring back. Question at hand is there's a large amount of land, 9111 Reeve Street. So if anyone doesn't know where that is, that's kind of a big square. That's the airport. Surprisingly, we don't own all the land along Shorecrest. There's a kind of a block cutout that's owned. It's changed hands, but now it's owned. All of the land's been assembled by one owner. He also owns the hangar development right next to it off of Reeves or off of Weiss. So we had looked at that land. We were interested in that land. We have discussed purchasing that land to use for airport operations. We made no progress. There was the asking price and even the appraisals came in very, very high. We don't have an immediate need. We did look at it a couple of times. We looked at it for our remote parking. So back in 2014, we ran out of parking. So we opened the remote Love Connection lot out at Mockingbird and Harry Hines. If anyone has used our remote lot, it's our discount or was our discounted product. At the time we acquired that land, we were also looking at that square of land on the north for additional remote parking. We've also had that land, even though we don't own it, in the alternatives for the Consolidated Rental Car Center. So if we've briefed the Transportation Committee a number of times on that project, and that northern property was included in one of the alternatives we looked at for the Consolidated Rental Car Center. And then has the aviation department been working with the owners of property regarding plans? Not really. The property owner is aware of the plans and actually has been a proponent of the plans. They also owned property to the south on Cedar Springs, which was being negatively affected by the traffic being pushed off of Mockingbird going around to Cedar Springs. So they're well aware of where we are and what we've been doing on the alternate entry. What's on the table? Is it foregone? No, I don't think it's necessarily foregone conclusion. We're duty bound, frankly, as the administrators of the airport, to identify issues and seek solutions. I think at the end of the day, we will do our analysis, we'll get the input, and we will make a recommendation. I don't know what that recommendation is yet because we haven't done that analysis. I can say that all of us that work for the airport, none of us will decide whether it gets done or not. All decisions with regard to Love Field are ultimately made by the Dallas City Council. So, no alternate entry is an option. Yes, it's always an option to do nothing. In every project, all your alternatives include a do nothing option. As an alternative, would a tunnel be preferred? I think we have to look at the analysis. I do think if we could get to Denton Drive, and we had a lot of hope for that alternative. I think its proximity is challenging. I think we got a lot of development over there. I think connecting to the Burbank station, distance wise, all that makes sense. When our offices used to be in the terminal building, and you could look out from our offices and you could watch the Green Line drive, go right next to the airport. And it's always been a frustration to me that the opportunity to connect or to have the Green Line have a stop, have a route that would have connected to the airport. That was always a pretty big miss opportunity. So I think the Denton Drive, just based on the analysis we've done thus far, really just wasn't viable to keep working on. There wasn't a good solution to those problems, and so that's why we did not include that in the go forward options we're evaluating. Have we looked at a remote roadway from Lemon Mockingbird Denton for EMS? Yeah, I kind of talked about that a little ago. There's always a possibility to sort of had a dedicated pathway that would be closed to other traffic that we might make for EMS. That is always an option. I think, as I said before, city streets are really the best option for first responders. Everything else becomes pretty complicated. I think at the end of the day, if we were in a no alternate entry, it just didn't prove out from a cost standpoint to a congestion and vehicle miles traveled improvement standpoint, and we just couldn't make a recommendation, or council didn't feel like it was viable to go move forward. We're always working on our emergency plans, our emergency response plans. We got a dedicated team to that. They would, maybe take that on as something that they would look at. I think incurring a large expense to build a tunnel dedicated just for police and fire to come in if we need them, I don't think there's on a cost benefit analysis, we could make that recommendation to spend those kind of funds. So we'll continue to look at it, but the preference would be to have more than one entrance that would be a public roadway that could be accessible by all first responders, not just Dallas PD and fire, but if we had multi-jurisdictions, then that gets complicated on who knows who and who can grant access and get access and those kind of things. So peak times for traffic, I don't know them off the top of my head, but our morning rush, which is the 5 a.m. to, and we'll get you specific, and we've done a lot of traffic counts, so we really do, we probably studied that to death. But our morning, the ingress is really the heavy. It's the 5 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. Time period, and then the ingress is in the morning, and the egress, and then of course is in the afternoon, and it's it adjusts also by day. So as our local arrival count goes up on Thursday and Friday afternoons, we really just have heavy volumes going through there between, say, 3:30 and 6 or 6:30. So we'll get some specifics, and we can show exactly where those traffic counts are and when the volumes go through those intersections and when we're at failure. So, failure is the cars cannot clear the intersection. And that's what really leads to the long waits, the idling cars, and the increase in emissions. Never once had a problem with traffic entry. I really question need. Okay. I don't have a response to that. What the project will come to fruit estimated. So the probability, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't give you a percentage. I think we need to remain open. We need to look at the data. We need to do the analysis. We need to get the input. We need to increase the sort of evaluation criteria that we use as we look at the project, and whether or not the impacts can be mitigated and those kind of things. I think the time frame, we were probably more motivated to get this moving quicker. I think we definitely got a 2 or 3 year breather, that we can be slow and deliberate in our planning and analysis of the project. But ultimately, I would say it's probably a 5-year time horizon before we're really ready for it to be a project to be awarded for design and construction. Has the airport looked at broader? Well, that's what we're doing. So as we get this input, we are going to be sure and listen to all of our constituents, the broad community, the 1.1 million citizens who own the airport. We'll look at our passengers, the probably, let's say, 3 million unique people that use the airport and how they use it. And then as well as the immediate neighbors that are surrounding the airport. We're doing that now. And I think this portion is to get that feedback to make sure that we're including that in the evaluation criteria that we take back to this to the city council as we present the findings of the analysis.
All right, Mark, I think unfortunately we're coming near the end of our meeting, and definitely we've got a lot of questions. So if we didn't get to your questions tonight, we will follow up via email. Like I said, there's a lot of questions. This is why we tried to answer on the chat and through the presentation questions that we had received ahead of time. Of course, sometimes there are very technical questions or questions that have a very long or lengthy answer. So we may have held those questions that we can answer in more detail at a later time, but we tried to get through as many questions as possible. Before I turn it back over to Mark, I do want to just point out again our link to the survey, which we also put in the chat and will be posted on the Love Field websites. So you'll see them here on the screen, as well as our upcoming meetings. We're continuing the public outreach through 3 more meetings that have been scheduled in July 23rd, September 3rd, as well as September 22nd. You can continue to connect with us on social media through all the Dallas Love Field channels, Facebook, Twitter, and you can even contact us. Of course, Mark is our presenter tonight and our director of aviation. We've already done the questions, but before I leave it to Mark to close out with his final comments, when you do close out of tonight's meeting, I encourage you to use the red exit event button down at the bottom left-hand corner, because that will also give you an opportunity to rate our meeting as well as give additional feedback. Without further ado, Mark, do you have any closing comments?
I don't. I really want to thank everyone for joining us in this format. We've done a couple of public meetings this way. It's, we rather have in-person meetings, but quite frankly, I think the turnout we're getting via these has been really good. I think it's a real good option for folks that otherwise can't take time out of their day. And we know it's a big burden for y'all to be able to come to an in-person meeting in the evening when you've got, family and other things you got to do. So I really appreciate you taking the time and allowing us to kind of tell you where we're at and what we're doing, make sure you're fully informed. And so we want to continue that. We look forward to your questions and your survey and your additional input. Like I said, we'll have more community input. We'll continue that process, and that everything we'll do will be public and transparent, so that you'll know what we're doing and you'll be able to know that we've heard every voice. So thank you all.